Welcome everyone to Nebraska Farm Bureau's Inside Profitability series. My name is Jay Rempe. I'm a senior economist for Nebraska Farm Bureau, and I will be your host today. I'm broadcasting from home, so I apologize for my dog. Something must have gotten excited outside. We've had foxes in the neighborhood, so maybe that's going. Anyway, welcome to our series. The Inside Profitability series is a series of events that we're hosting, webinars, podcasts, and social media events that are focused around farm and ranch profitability. And the idea is to key on issues and topics that members and farmers and ranchers across the state raise that it's key to their profitability. And our goal is to try to provide information to you to help you manage and maintain economically viable farms and ranchers. And we certainly hope that you find this series to be informative and provide you with the information that can help you do that. So today we're going to focus on labor issues and labor shortages in agriculture and ag businesses. It's the issue of labor and labor shortages is no stranger in the news. You can't go anywhere without picking up a paper and seeing about the problems that we're having in today's economy in the United States and particularly Nebraska around that issue. And those kind of labor shortages and problems add delays and cost and increased stress to operations in the state. And so oftentimes it creates frustrations for farmers and ranchers. So today we've got a panel of experts that have looked at the issue and have addressed the issue in different ways or offered some suggestions in different ways to address the issue. And so we're happy to bring them here to you today to learn more about what farmers and ranchers can do in the way of hiring and managing workers during these kinds of times with the shortages. So we're going to start today with a team from the University of Missouri. Joe Horner works as an agriculture economist with the University of Missouri Extension, and he's going to present about farm labor trends. And then we have Alice Roach, who is a senior research associate at the University of Missouri, and she's going to cover how to recruit, interview, and onboard and train farm employees. And then we have Ryan Milhollin, who's also with the Missouri Extension, and he's going to share some of the mechanics that are involved around paying and retaining and terminating farmer workers. And so all three of these experts that we've gathered, they work together to co-author the Missouri Farm Labor Guide, which is a helpful guide to help navigate this farm labor process. And those of you participating today will get a copy of that labor guide when we're finished. After they give their presentation, we have with us Cherie, who's a Brown County Farm Bureau member and an office manager for Rollstone feedlots, who works with the H2A Foreign Guest Worker Program. And she's going to talk a little bit about how they use that program to help address their labor needs. We're going to, after the presentations, we're going to open it up for questions. So please, if you have a question, type it in the chat or use the Q&A function. Or once we get to that Q&A session, you could also raise your hand and we'll unmute your mic and you could ask your question that way. So either way, please, if you got questions, let us know. And I think we're ready to begin. So Joe, I think you're first up and I will turn it over to you. Thanks for being with us today, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Thanks for asking us to be a part of the Nebraska Farm Bureau webinar. We're excited to be a part of it. A little bit of background. About 4 years ago, we kept getting requests from farmers to do anything we could to help with the agricultural labor situation because we felt like we had an extreme shortage of labor. And so we got a grant from the USDA Risk Management Education group to put together a teaching package for trying to raise the skill set of human resource management on farms to help compete with the labor situation. And we thought we had a tight labor situation 4 years ago. This webinar is finding and keeping agricultural labor. Keeping agricultural labor is a real issue right now because we've got such labor shortages across the economy. And farmers, as that picture indicates, we're about 90 days away from starting to plant corn and the busy season of the year. Livestock guys are already finding extreme difficulty in finding labor. So let's take a look at where we're at if we want to go to the next slide. Basically, before COVID, Nebraska had an unemployment rate about 3%. We're now sitting at an unemployment rate of about 1.8% in Nebraska. And if you look at that county map, the 1.8% basically represents some urban counties, but a lot of the rural counties where the food is produced, we're down 1 or less percent unemployment rate. I think the lowest unemployment rate in the state is in Rock County at 0.6. But if you're at 0.6 or 0.7 or 0.8, it doesn't really make any difference. There's just not much labor out there. So we've seen some inflation in ag wages. It's hard for the surveys to keep up with what's going on farm. It's also hard for farmers to feel relaxed about where they're at in their labor situation. And this was one of the reasons we originally put together our farm labor guide. Next. Because as we compete with off-farm employment, we've got to be able to offer employees, whether they're our existing employees or somebody we want to hire, we've got to be able to offer them a type of hiring and retention and training that they're used to, and a compensation package that they're used to, or where they can go other places and get. So to try to raise awareness of those, we put together a simple 36-page guide. It's full of references. It's got a table of contents. It's a quick and easy guide. When you're a busy farm employer, you do not have time to sit and read a textbook. You do not have time to wade through all the labor compliance issues there's an amazing amount of information on the web, but you can go down a lot of rat holes without getting what you want and getting it in an ag specific format. So we put together a short guide on recruiting the employee you want, how to be competitive in compensation, what are good legal hiring practices, what you can and can't say, how you manage the agricultural labor for reduced turnover, mentoring and onboarding. We're bringing on a lot of new employees. There's a lot more turnover than there was. And finally, with this tight labor environment, we're probably going to employ some people we really are not happy with and have to deal with some termination and looking at legal termination. So next. The reason behind this is basically we deal with a lot of production risk around weather and around marketing risk in agriculture. We're used to that as farmers. We're used to getting the job done. But as we continue to grow scale and we try to employ more and more people operating bigger and bigger equipment with more and more dollars at risk, the financial risks, the human risk, both from human safety and from legal risks, start to offer potentially major threats to our business. So with that, we really focused on what we can do to reduce risk by being better human resource managers. Next. As we go through the rest of this webinar, these are the questions I think farmers need to ponder, whether it's worth the investment and time trying to get up to speed with some of the human resource issues. Do we understand on our farm, do we understand and comply with state and federal labor laws? Do we recruit and retain employees well? Do we train people well? And do we have a set of simple human resource standard operating procedures, checklists, simple things that are built, customized to our farm that systemize it and make hiring, firing, training easier to accomplish in a tight labor frame? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alice Roach, who wrote a large percentage of this manual. And next, if Alice, I'll let you go through the employment process.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, as Joe mentioned, for the rest of our presentation, we're going to cover the 6 steps of the employment process that we outline in our Missouri Farm Labor Guide and share with you some tips and best practices that you can consider throughout this process to make it as successful as possible for you. So next slide, please. So the 6-step process begins with recruitment. And when I use the term recruitment, you might think about the types of practices you could put into place to attract new workers. But what I would urge you to do is to take a step back and instead start recruitment with what we call a job analysis. And a job analysis is an internal thinking process that you do alongside your farm team to answer 3 key questions. The first of those is to identify what are unmet work needs on your operation. So are there certain tasks or duties or activities that aren't getting done, or are there responsibilities that aren't being managed? After you answer that question, move on next to thinking about what types of qualifications would someone need to have in order to do those tasks, duties, activities, or manage those responsibilities that you outlined in number 1. And then third, think about the work environment that you'd create for someone who was tasked with those activities and duties and responsibilities. And at the end of that process, consider with your farm team whether you may have some available capacity within your existing team where you could assign some additional work, some of those unmet work needs to your existing team. But if you realize that you have more work than what your existing team can manage on its own, then it's time to think about maybe bringing in someone from the outside, a new hire to help with your farm business. So when you're ready to seek out a new hire, you start that process with what's called a job description. So the job description will have a lot of the same information that you identified in the job analysis. The key difference is that the job description is a public-facing piece of communication that you're wanting to distribute to let people know that you do have an available job, whereas the job analysis was that thinking process that helped you to craft a job that you could go out and then tell about in that job description. There's a really nice job description writer from the US Labor Department that I want to draw your attention to. The URL is up here on the screen. At this career one-stop URL, it's a really easy tool to use. You can just enter in the type of job that you're wanting to create and then also select your state. And the website will generate a sample job description for that particular position. And then you can have the flexibility to tweak it and customize it to your specific farm operation. But it's helpful to at least see what tends to be expected and required for a particular type of position. So it's a nice starting point. After you've produced the job description that you plan to use, you'll next want to think about ways you can promote it. So you can find potential job applicants, and there are multiple channels for you to consider. Those include posting on social media or job or career websites. You could place advertisements in media like newspapers or radio content, community bulletin boards, networking within your community or industry. Those are all potential channels for you to help reach out to individuals who might be interested in employment. When you are sharing your job description, it's important to include a call to action that you want people who are interested to go ahead and fill out a job application. And there's a nice application template that we've included in our Missouri Farm Labor Guide, which you can access from the URL up there on the screen. And in a job application, you're wanting to ask key pieces of information and have that in a written format so you can go and compare the responses from multiple people who submit their application. So it's a nice way to collect the same information about anyone who's interested in the particular job that you have available. It's nice to have that in writing too, because it's much easier to go back and look at a written application than it is to try to recall pieces of a conversation, or even if you took notes during a conversation, you may not have captured all the details that you wish you would have. So it's nice to have all that information on paper and ask for the applicants to supply that. So next slide, please. So before we talk more about the stages of the employment process, I do just briefly want to cover some data here from a 2019 survey that Farm Journal conducted about ag labor. And one question looked into competition for labor. So it's really important sort of during that job analysis, job description writing stage to think through who your competitors are so you can create a job that's attractive to your local marketplace. So in this survey, the producers who responded most likely cited other farms or local manufacturers as the top competitor for labor in their local areas. And so if you are interested in creating a new position or seeking employment, seeking employees rather, think about what other farms in your area are doing or local manufacturers are doing to attract workers so you can create an attractive position for your operation. So next slide, please. The next stage of the employment process after the recruitment stage is hiring. And so hopefully the applicants have submitted some written applications for you to consider. When you do receive written applications, try to put them into 3 different stacks. So identify candidates who you would definitely want to interview, identify candidates who you maybe want to interview, and identify candidates who appear to not be a very good fit and you wouldn't want to interview them. During the interview process, the whole goal is to learn more about individuals who have interest in employment with your operation. And so you can make a better decision about the best fit for your operation. You can follow a few best practices during the interview process to help inform your decision about who to hire. So the first of those is to ask open-ended questions. These are questions that you can't answer with a simple yes or no. A yes or no response doesn't get you the detail that you're likely going to need to make a good hiring decision. So for example, let's say that you're interested in hiring someone who has experience working on machinery. You could ask something like, have you ever worked on machinery? But even if you get a yes answer, you still don't know what type of machinery that person's worked on or the extent of what worked on means. So does that mean in their minds just general maintenance, or does that mean that they've overhauled a piece of machinery or equipment? You really don't know with that simple yes or no. So you as the interviewer would need to continue to ask other follow-up questions in order to really elicit the type of information that you would need to make a good decision. So instead, pivot to asking open-ended questions. You could ask something like, tell me about your experience maintaining machinery. And then hopefully the interviewee would feel encouraged to share some examples or stories or anecdotes that could highlight their work experience. By asking open-ended questions, it also helps you to follow this 80-20 listening rule. And that refers to the fact that as an interviewer, you should spend about 20% of the interview time speaking, and you should let the interviewee spend about 80% of the time speaking. So that gets back to the adage that you learn more when you listen than when you speak. And because an interview's purpose is to help you learn more about the candidate, you want to give the candidate ample opportunities to speak about his or her experience. Also during interviewing, try to use the same set of questions for all interviewees so you can compare the responses more easily side by side, and also avoid any unacceptable questions. There are several examples up here on the screen. These are touching on personal characteristics, which you can ask about. You should instead focus your questioning on whether someone has the capability to do the job that you've outlined. So next slide, please. So after the interview, you hopefully have a good feeling about one or two candidates and that they could potentially fit well on your operation. You can do some further due diligence to sort of verify your decision or validate how you're feeling about different candidates. Some of those other due diligence practices include things like doing a background check, running drug tests, asking for references, looking in E-Verify for eligibility verification. And then after you've done that due diligence, if you're ready to make an offer, you can extend an offer over the phone, but you should always follow up with a written offer. And that written offer should include information about compensation and benefits, what exactly the worker is going to be doing, and some details about the work schedule. Assuming that that individual who's received the offer accepts it, then you can move and create, or rather complete your new hire paperwork. So as an employer, you'll want to make sure you have your employer identification number, and you'll also need to collect federal and state withholding paperwork from the candidate or the new hire. So next slide, please. After a candidate is a new hire and is ready to start in the position, you'll want to think about how you can onboard that individual. So onboarding talks about the types of activities to help someone assimilate into your business. Another way to think about this is telling your new hire how your business functions, so then when they come into the business, they can do the job that you hired them to do. So some sample onboarding practices include things like explaining your goals, vision, and mission, introducing the new hire to coworkers or vendors and suppliers, advisors, supervisors, anyone who they'll interact with regularly in the business, giving a tour of the operation. So where are the bathrooms? Where do you eat lunch? Talking through guidelines, such as what's the dress code? What are cell phone use guidelines? All those details to help position the employee for succeeding in the job that you hired them to do. There is a nice onboarding template available from the Cornell Ag Workforce Development Program. And I'd encourage you to take a look at this because it outlines some key onboarding activities and assigns milestone dates to them. So in other words, it shares what you should consider doing in the first day, the first week, and the first month. So it's a nice resource as you're thinking about how to onboard workers in your own operation. Training's different from onboarding in that it's more focused on ongoing educational opportunities to improve skills of your workforce. And you can select an approach to training that works best for your operation and the learning styles of your workforce. You can consider training opportunities that are formal, for example, sending someone to a seminar that's in person, or maybe enrolling someone in an online course. Or you can also consider spontaneous feedback as a type of training. So for example, if you're working side by side with someone, offer some ideas about what that person's doing well and where that person could use some improvement. That's another form of training. Mentoring is a little different from training in that it's focused more on long-term professional development, but you can consider how to maybe pair a junior staffer with a senior staffer to kind of facilitate that on long-term professional development opportunities. So with that, I'll toss it to Ryan, who will pick up the other steps of the employment process.
Well, thank you, Alice. And I'll kind of, like Alice said, I'll kind of switch to kind of the operational side. And some of the important things that, you as an ag employer kind of need to think through is compensation is kind of one of the first ones is, how do we offer a competitive wage? It's really kind of our wage. It's kind of trying to understand those local dynamics of who are you competing with, whether it's local manufacturers or a lot of other farmers and stuff, and to understand of what type of wage. That also goes into whether you want to do a salary type position or if you want to do an hourly. Those are some of the decisions to kind of make when you start thinking through on the wage aspect as well. Another thing on compensation is related to overtime. A lot of times ag employers, if it's on farm type stuff, they tend to have an exemption for overtime, but carefully look at each position to make sure that it does fall under that Fair Labor Standards Act. The U.S. Department of Labor has a really nice website you can go to kind of look up and understand of if there's times that you do have to pay overtime for certain positions or not. But that's definitely an important thing for an ag employer as well. There's also non-monetary compensation. That's another thing you can put into kind of the mix for employees as well. It could be anything from housing to a side of beef to work, clothes, apparel, maybe use of a farm vehicle, other things like that as well. But just some other types of perks or things that employees can have as well that can kind of be as part of the compensation package as well. Also, there are some ag employers doing incentive pay. So really trying to, performance-based pay that relates to kind of the operational goals. They could be things like formal bonuses. It could be informal bonuses. It could be things like profit sharing. It could also be, like things like stock ownership into the business as well. So, but we just encourage people that, make sure to kind of tie the operational goals back to the pay, make sure that they're kind of in good alignment as well. There's also benefits too, as ag employers you can offer as well. It could be things like health insurance, it could be retirement, it could be paid time off. There's lots of other options as well. It's just really trying to understand if you're going to offer those, really understand what is the true cost of those and how to put that into the package as well. Lastly, on the taxes side, it's really just the federal, state, local taxes as well. It's making sure that you as an ag employer are doing the withholdings as corrected, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, federal income, and then making sure that you're filing those taxes when appropriate. So just making sure that you're following it like clockwork and completing everything in a timely fashion. The same Farm Journal Ag Labor Survey that Alice talked about earlier, they asked a question about benefits and basically just asked the respondents, do you offer any benefits? So definitely the largest one on this list at 47% was meat or other gifts, was kind of the ones that ag employers were offering. The next one was basically offering no benefits. So 39% didn't have any types of benefits they offered as well. And you can kind of see down through the list, we've got housing at 30%. 26% paid time off was offered to employees, also sick days as well. Health insurance, definitely a lot lower, 16%. Performance-based bonuses, about 14%. Retirement, dental insurance, life insurance, vision insurance, those things were a lot more on the smaller scale as well. But this might just give you some examples of what some of the ag employers in the US were doing as well. One thing I think we'd really like to stress to you is that, ag employers really ought to develop an employment manual if you haven't done one. It's really kind of your official source for kind of your operational policies, your practices, standards, really, other information about your business. It's kind of that one-stop shop where you can put all that information into one document. It's also really good to share with your employees. So when you're starting to do things like onboarding or bringing them to the business, it's a good resource to kind of walk through the employee as well, to kind of lay out those expectations as well. It's also nice, I think a lot of employers will actually make an employee sign at the end that they have received the employment manual and that they've went through that information with their employer. So it's a good kind of checklist to go through it. There's a really nice, Vermont's got a really nice kind of farm labor dashboard that helps. It's got a policy generator, so you can go through and plug in information. It helps you kind of fill in the boxes for what goes into an employment manual. But if you kind of go through their, multi-step process at the end, you can kind of basically have a start on an employment manual as well. So it's a really good resource to take a look at. Kind of best practices to kind of support retention. We've talked about incentives a little bit, but financial or gifts contingent on performance is definitely a good practice to support retention. Another one, promote employees who have earned it. So if there's a way, or if there's a hierarchy within your business where you can, give people a promotion in some capacity as well, it's definitely a good way to kind of help support retention. Training, continued education. We definitely see that as another opportunity to help with retention as well. Sometimes, spontaneous feedback. So just giving, feedback. It doesn't always have to be formal feedback or communication channels on a week-to-week basis, but just letting an employee know that, they did a really good job on something, and giving information back to them is really something that kind of helps, employees, and they definitely value it. Definitely support a positive work-life balance and understanding of the work time, and also, people have their outside life that they're doing and stuff. Is making sure you've got a good balance and mixture there, and can accommodate with them when they maybe need a little bit more time outside of work for that. The last one we've got on the list for kind of support and retention was just kind of giving public recognition. And, maybe if you're having a formal meeting on, a weekly basis, and maybe it's recognizing somebody who did a really good job on something, and doing it in front of the other people, or within the business with the other employees, and trying to pick out some good things for other employees on future weeks. So we've kind of put a side note here that, doesn't necessarily have to be expensive on some things for retention, but it's definitely things that you just want employees to value. So really kind of get to know your workers is one good way to kind of really help with that job retention. Termination. Sometimes we have employees that just don't really work out, and it's just trying to understand if you get in that situation, what do you do? What are the rules? Making sure you do it properly. Nebraska, also Missouri as well, it's an employment at will state. So within that law, within the rules, basically employees or employers may terminate employment arrangements at any time, provided really that there's no laws broken. So basically you don't have a contract with that employee. There was no discrimination if this a situation that caused a termination. There's also this what we call public policy exception. It's like maybe a worker was going to file a work comp claim, and you terminate them. So things like that, or violation of law. Those are things that you had to be, you can't really terminate on those, but other cases at will, you may terminate really at any time. So, and that's definitely something you can lay out in the employment manual as well. So it's very crystal clear for people for both sides. Kind of summary of kind of what both Joe, Alice, and myself have talked about, but some estimates, really say that 25% turnover of farm help isn't unlikely. It could be higher, it could be lower. It just depends on, where you're at and what's kind of going on as well. But another thing to point out to people too is that replacing an employee can cost up to 20% or more of kind of that former employee salary. So both the time you invest in trying to find a new employee, and trying to recruit and find people as well, it's not easy. And lastly, kind of want to point on this slide is that, what can you as an ag employer do to kind of avoid high turnover rates, really improve retention, so you're not out there always having to try and find new employees, really, enhance your worker productivity, really help your business, and really kind of minimize your risk for your operation. But so at least for the kind of the University of Missouri team, I think that's all we've got for our slideshow. So I think I can turn it back over to Farm Bureau.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe, Alice, and Ryan. Lots of good information there. Next, I'm going to invite Cherie Priest to come back on. We get her camera going and get her up and going here. Cherie is as I mentioned before, is a Brown County member from Brown County and she's an office manager for Rolling Stone's feedlots, and she gets to deal with these human resource issues on a day in and day out basis. And she made the mistake of mentioning that to me one time when we were in Washington, D.C. together. So I roped her into coming and helping us out today. So Cherie, thank you very much. And we'll get your PowerPoint up and rolling. I think Phil is going to put that up there, and we'll let you get started, Cherie. Thank you.
Thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information with you. I know how difficult it was when we first started to look into this program just to meet some of our needs, how hard it was just to find the information and resources to be able to pursue the things that we needed. Just as a little bit more background, I am the office manager at Rolling Stone Feed Yard. We're in Ainsworth, Nebraska. It's north central part of the state. We're a 40,000 head feed yard here. We've been in operation as this current entity for about the past 12 years now. We also have a significant farming operation where we grow a lot of our own corn and soybeans that goes into our rations here. Our employment, basically, when we started out, we probably were running about 38 people here on our payroll list. To date, that is somewhat less. I'd say we're probably around 28 to 30, but total hours worked is probably not that different. Our turnover rate has always been extremely low, and really it's just been as our workers have reached retirement age and kind of left for those reasons that we've lost most of our workers, and being able to replace those workers has become more and more difficult over the years. Until about 6 years ago is when we really started seeing just a drop off on new applicants, people looking for work here in this area, and knew that we needed to approach it in a different area, in a different way. You can go ahead and go to the first slide. Okay, that's when we started looking into the H2A program. That is basically the H2A section of the Immigration Nationality Act. It is the vehicle that provides for visas for admission of temporary non-immigrant workers for agricultural labor. The way that it is structured, it has to be temporary and seasonal in nature and agricultural. And it really starts out, the first step is on the employer. You have to file an application with the Employment and Training Administration, basically saying that there are not sufficient workers who are able, willing, qualified, and available, and that you have gone through steps for hiring and just been able to meet the needs for hiring for your work, for your business. Next slide. As with most things with the government, there's a significant amount of paperwork that has to be supplied to multiple agencies, and it does take a significant amount of time. So it's important that you plan ahead and realize that just because you want to start using the H2A program, it's not something that you decide and, oh, first of the month, next month, you're going to have workers in place. It typically takes anywhere from 75 to 90 days from the time you start a process to having workers actually be able to show up and work at your farm or at your operation. On this slide, I'm not going to go through every single step here, but basically list the different organizations you have to submit paperwork to. The first one's going to be the state workforce agency. That's where you first apply for your job order. That's also going to trigger some other things to happen. You will have to do some advertising in a couple of different major newspapers within your area for that job, basically just to make sure that there are not any domestic workers available looking for work for that type of work. You will also basically give them the type of housing that you're able to provide, and that they will be setting up inspection of that housing as well. The next application that you're going to have to file is with the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor in Chicago. And that is basically the step where then at the end of that, you're either going to be approved or denied to be able to participate in this program. Once you do get approval from the Department of Labor, then you complete an H2A visa petition with the Citizen and Immigration Services, Homeland Security, and that's going to basically give you the ability then for when you find workers for them to be able to obtain visas. We can go to the next slide. Again, once you have those approvals, then you start to recruit your workers. They then have to apply for the H2A visa with Department of State in the country that they're in and complete consulate interviews. Once that is done, then they are issued visas and approved to travel to the United States, to your work site. And those visas also have start and end dates with for their arrival and departure. Next slide. There are requirements that you must meet for these employees, and some of those, the basic ones are you have to provide them with housing. Sorry, got ahead of myself here. Let's first go back up here. That first bullet point is an important one. For the first 50% time period of the season that you're hiring for, you are required to employ any qualified U.S. worker that applies for that job. And those jobs are posted on the state Department of Labor workforce. That advertisement is ongoing. So they see people that are looking for work will see those jobs. If they apply and if they are qualified and eligible, you must hire them until you've reached at least 50% of the window that you have defined as the period that you're hiring for. Once you pass that 50% window, that requirement goes away. You have to pay the H2A workers based off from the adverse effect wage rate that is set by the government. For Nebraska at the end of last year, it was increased to $16.47 an hour. You can pay them more than that, but you cannot pay them less than that. You have to provide housing at no cost to those H2A workers. Again, the state will inspect that housing once you notify them of your intent to participate in the program to make sure that it meets all the safety requirements, and basically it's approved by the state at that point. Next slide. You have to provide workers with either 3 meals a day, the cost of, or if your housing has kitchen facilities, that also qualifies as having furnished free and convenient cooking kitchen facilities for those workers, and they can prepare their own meals in that case. You do have to make sure that they have transportation to the grocery store at least once a week. You also have to provide transportation from their living quarters to the work site at no cost to them. The only other significant cost you have to the employee is that you do have to reimburse them for their inbound and outbound travel expenses, their flights to the country and to your place of where they're going to be living, and also their consulate fee, which is $190. That's a standard fee that they have to pay to the consulate in their country, and you reimburse them for that once they arrive. Next slide. To the government, different organizations that you have now applied to. When you make those applications, you will also have some fees. So there's a labor certification fee of $100 plus $10 per certified worker. You pay that to the state. Hang on, I'm trying to remember that one. To the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor in Chicago. Homeland Security, you're going to pay a $460 filing fee. That is a flat fee regardless of the number of workers that are on it. You're also going to pay then the $190 consulate fee. Other than that, the biggest cost probably, if they are coming from outside the country, is going to be their flights here and home. Now, you do have the option of hiring H2A workers that are in the current country currently on a current visa, if they're on a contract that has ended and are looking for a new contract to go on to, in which case those travel expenses become significantly less. For those workers, the rules for them, once they have an H2A visa, they do have limits on that visa that match up to the contracts that they are on. However, they can always move to another contract at the end of that visa, and they're allowed to stay here in the United States for up to 3 years without having to leave the country. Once they have been here for 3 years, they have to go back to their home country for a minimum of 3 uninterrupted months before they can return to the United States again. But again, especially when we were dealing with COVID and the limits with travel for some of those guys coming from other countries, it became really advantageous to look for H2A workers that were currently in the country. And again, there's significant savings for doing that. Next slide. Once you have hired these workers and they're working for you now, there are some differences in the way that their paychecks are handled and the taxes that they have to pay. Basically, you are not allowed to withhold anything from their paychecks. They are not required to pay Social Security, Medicare taxes on their wages, and you as an employer are not required to pay that matching portion on their pay either. So that is a savings that you will see, which is typically, it's 7.65% of the gross wages is normally what your matching part of their Social Security, Medicare taxes are. They do not pay it, and you do not pay that as well. They are responsible for their own federal income taxes, but you are not required, or you should not withhold those federal taxes from their paychecks unless they request it and have filled out the W-4 form. You will give them their W-2s at the end of the year, and they are required to file for their federal income taxes. And once they go home and come back into the country, those things will be reviewed. If they have not paid their taxes, they will have a hard time coming back and getting visas renewed. Nebraska is a state that requires that their state income tax is withheld from the H2A workers' paychecks. So that is typically about the only deduction you'll be making from their paycheck. Next slide. Okay, the tips that I would give you around working for this program are basically plan ahead. And this goes back to that first statement I made, that it's going to take 75 to 90 days typically to work through the process and get your workers here. So plan for that and think really carefully about the time periods that you want those workers for. If you start a program and you submit an application and you have that application approved and it goes well and you want to continue that year after year, it is extremely difficult to change the application the next year for dates that are any different than they were that first year. So even though the way things go in agriculture, 1 year is not necessarily like the year previous, you may not need workers to start at exactly the same time. Work around that, okay? And think about what your best case, worst case scenarios are and set those dates, thinking of that from that standpoint, that once it's set, it's going to be that way and it's going to be very difficult to change it going forward. If you ask for a worker to come the 1st of March and be here through the end of September 1 year, you're not going to be able to go back and say the next year, I don't want them until the 1st of April and extend it till 1st of December, say for harvesting purposes. So be very careful about the way that you structure that and set it. And think through that, again, as a temporary need, you do not ever want to submit an application that runs longer than 10 months. You will be rejected for that. They will say that it appears to be a full-time permanent position, which does not meet the requirements for this program. So those are things you want to keep in mind as you're filling out those applications. Let's go to the next slide. One way that we have found to kind of work around some of these issues is you can't apply for more than one contract in a year. We have summer contracts and we have winter contracts. The important thing to think about is that they just need to, the activities that you're asking workers to perform must be applicable to the season and significantly different from the other contracts that you have. So summer contracts should be more around planting, harvesting, farming type activities. Winter contracts are going to be around the types of tasks that you have. And for us, it's going to be more of taking care of feeding the animals, monitoring pens, things like that. Activities that are significantly different than the summer contract. I've given an example of how you would do that. And the dates that I've listed here, those are just examples. You can have dates for, if you're going to try to have more than one contract, those dates can overlap. There can be gaps in between. However you want to set that up, it's really more important that you think about the activities that they're going to be performing more than anything else on that. We have also begun to run 2 summer contracts. So for us, we have 2 summer contracts and 1 single winter contract. The summer contracts will start at the same time. One ends in October and the other one ends in December. And that's because we found that we just had a need for a few more workers to kind of finish off that end of the harvest type activity. We didn't need all of them then, and we managed it with 2 separate contracts that way. Next. Okay, the biggest question here is, given all of the paperwork and the red tape that you can sometimes get bound up at, is it really worth it? And we have been running this program for 5 years now, and I would have to say undoubtedly, yes, it is, because I don't know how we would run our feed yard anymore without this program to provide the workers. In the past 5 years, I literally had only 2 applications from US seekers of jobs. One of them, we actually offered positions to both of them. One of them did not last more than 6 months, mostly because they were having to travel and were having a hard time finding housing accommodations that they wanted here. The other one we offered the job to, and it became apparent that he was kind of just really meeting his needs for unemployment, because as soon as we offered the job, we didn't hear from him again after that. So just finding those applicants is one thing. Getting them to actually take a job is another issue we've been having. So without the H2A program, which now I'm basically hiring in each season, 8 to 11 workers per season, they've become a major player in our workforce. We've had extremely good luck with the quality of the candidates, the people that we've hired. They are here to work. They don't have any problem at all. I mean, they want to work. They want to work as many hours as they can get in here. That's why they're here. They're very conscientious employees. Typically, they work well together. They get along with our other employees quite well. The other point I guess I would make is that I do use a third-party company that helps us with this process, and I would recommend that as well. Even though you're going to see additional fees for that from that company, they're going to have expertise to manage and help you through this process that you would struggle with otherwise. Not only that, but they typically have access to recruitment that would be very difficult in finding these overseas workers as well. There's a lot of vetting that they will do for you. They understand the process and the needs that have to be met in order to have your applications approved by the government, which again, I can't overemphasize how helpful that is. So yes, that's really all I have to share right now.
We will bring this webinar to a close. I want to offer special thanks to Joe and Alice, Ryan, and Cherie on their presentations, just full of good information. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you very much. Just one note, we are scheduled for our next webinar on February 16th, and we are going to talk about rising input costs and what we can do about those in terms of managing. So thank you, everyone. That concludes our webinar today. I hope you have a good remainder of your day. Take care. Thank you.